Hello everyone, before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Lampshades made from human skin, murdering prisoners for a tattoo collection, seducing and subjecting inmates to sophisticated tortures. All of this is attributed to the wife of the Buchenwald commandant, Ilse Koch. Her name became synonymous with Nazi atrocities. For her boundless cruelty, she was nicknamed the Buchenwald Witch. She could whip prisoners or sick her vicious sheepdog on them. But the most horrifying part was that she allegedly enjoyed skinning people and turning their hides into souvenirs. Koch was tried 3 times, first by the Nazis themselves, then by the Americans, and finally by the Germans again. But each time she managed to avoid the death penalty. Why did legal authorities consider Ilse more dangerous than many SS officers, even though she wasn't even a camp overseer? What atrocities did the Buchenwald Witch actually commit, and which crimes remained unproven? My name is Mikhail Yegorenko, and right now I'll tell you all about it. And to see even more content, subscribe to Theory of Everything on VK. The link is in the description. How to become a Nazi. Ilse Koch, née Kohler, was born in Dresden on September 22, 1906, into a simple working-class family. After 8th grade, she went to a commercial school and spent another 2 years there. After her studies, the girl worked as a stenographer and then as a secretary. In May 1932, even before the National Socialists came to power, she joined the NSDAP, which at that time had become the most successful party in Germany. In 1934, she met her future husband, the SS officer Karl Otto Koch, who was the commandant of the Nazi concentration camp Sachsenberg on the territory of modern Austria. There, the 28-year-old Ilse started working as a secretary. During his service, Karl Koch attracted the attention of Heinrich Himmler. Not afraid to carry out even the most monstrous orders, from 1934 to 1937, he held various positions in several camps, including Dachau, Sachsenhausen, and Esterwegen. He earned a reputation as a sadist without moral principles. All this time, Ilse maintained a romantic relationship with him and visited him at his places of service. 2 years later, the couple married, having received special permission to enter into marriage as required by a recently issued order. Himmler demanded that SS members prove their racial purity and provide a pedigree going back to 1800. Shortly after the wedding, in 1937, Karl Koch was transferred to the position of commandant of the new camp, Buchenwald. Its first prisoners were political detainees, Jehovah's Witnesses, criminals, and men of non-traditional orientation. They were transferred from Sachsenhausen and later from the disbanded concentration camps Sachsenberg and Lichtenberg. By mid-July, the first prisoners arrived in Buchenwald, whose labor built all the camp buildings and structures: barracks, warehouses, guard towers, barbed wire fences, a bunker with a torture chamber, a block where monstrous experiments were conducted on people, barracks for overseers, and houses for officers. Outside the camp territory, the young Koch family lived in a villa nearby in inappropriate luxury, but no one knew on what funds. Ilse boasted of her wealth to the wives of other Buchenwald employees, for which they immediately disliked her. In 1938, the commandant's family welcomed a son, Artwin. Then 2 daughters appeared in the family, Gisela and Gudrun, but the younger Gudrun died at 4 months from pneumonia. The parents loved strolling with the children through the zoo, built just 10 meters from the camp fence. From the outside, the family looked prosperous, but Ilse didn't consider it her duty to take care of the children and household, although that was the role Adolf Hitler assigned to women. All the housework was done for her by prisoners, who feared Frau Koch more than the commandant himself. Rumors circulated that she was simply a fiend from hell, a sadist, and a pervert. In Buchenwald, prisoners called Ilse Koch the Kommandantscha and recounted that while walking through the camp, she could strike any prisoner with a whip or set her vicious sheepdog on him, which would maul a person to death. And she allegedly loved inspecting the territory on horseback, lashing prisoners with a whip right from the saddle. They said she walked past exhausted men in revealing outfits, and for glances she deemed indecent, she demanded punishment for the offenders. Moreover, any of her orders had to be carried out just like an order given by her husband. "Hey, you lustful, dirty pig, how dare you stare at her?" For the slightest offenses, she reported prisoners to the commandant, knowing that cruel punishment awaited them. On one rainy day at the end of summer 1938, prisoners were engaged in landscaping work directly near the coke house. Their work could be observed from the villa's windows. Suddenly, Ilse Koch approached the prisoners and shouted, "You must work, you beasts, not stand around." At that, she noticed how prisoner Lindner straightened up to scrape the stuck dirt off his shovel. From the indictment in the case of Ilse Koch on charges of murder and other crimes. When the column returned to the camp, prisoner Lindner was called to the parade ground and, in front of the assembled prisoners, he was hung on a post with his hands tied behind his back. This was a favorite torment of the Buchenwald executioner Martin Sommer. On one of the days in 1941, prisoners were hauling stones to the road passing near the superior's houses. At that time, this road had to be properly finished. SS Scharfer Kubitz supervised the work. When the column passed by the coke house, the accused was standing there and shouted to Kubitz, "Look how slowly these Jewish pigs are going." After that, Kubitz forced the prisoners to run. They dropped stones and received serious injuries. Some prisoners could no longer move and had to be carried to the camp. From the indictment in the case of Ilse Koch on charges of murder and other crimes. But these testimonies are far from the most horrific. Prisoners claimed that the commandant's wife arranged a real hunt for people with tattoos, ordering them to remove their striped robes, inspecting their bodies, and selecting suitable designs. The selected men were taken away, and some time later, their corpses arrived at Block Number 2, the Pathological Anatomy Department, with traces of lethal injections. Their skin was removed, from which book bindings, photo album covers, cases for pocket knives, gloves, and lampshades were made. Austrian political prisoner Gustav Wiegerer, a capo in the Pathological Anatomy Department, stated under oath that he personally made a lampshade from human skin for Frau Koch. One day, around the same time in 1941, the camp commandant Koch and SS Dr. Muller appeared in the Pathological Anatomy Department. At that time, a lampshade from tanned, tattooed human skin was being prepared for Koch. Koch and Muller selected from the available tanned, parchment-thin pieces of human skin those with suitable tattoos for the lampshade. From the conversation between them, it became clear that the previously selected motifs did not please Ilse Koch. Then the lampshade was completed and handed over to Koch. Gustav Wiegerer, from sworn testimony. One prisoner, the camp doctor's secretary, recounted that he brought the lampshade to the Koch villa. On the lampshade, tattoos and nipples were visible. Such souvenirs, as witnesses claim, were presented to camp visitors from higher authorities. There, they were also shown even more repulsive exhibits, especially dried heads the size of a fist. But even the most hardened Nazis refused such gifts. About 30 corpses arrived at the Pathological Anatomy Department daily, whose violent death was easy to establish, but the true causes were never recorded. Relatives of the victims were always told that death occurred due to illness. There were so many who died during monstrous experiments, tortures, and beatings that the crematorium worked around the clock. From 1937 to 1940, bodies were taken to the city cemetery in Weimar, where about 3,500 people were cremated over 3 years. In 1940, a crematorium was built on the camp territory, and torture chambers were set up in the basement. Hooks were driven in, on which more than 1,000 prisoners were hanged during the years of Buchenwald's existence. However, the conditions in the camp were so unbearable that people died from natural causes as well. Exhaustion after heavy work in the quarry, diseases, and hunger. Products, including meat that was supposed to be in the prisoner's ration, were constantly withdrawn. The SS officers took the meat that was allocated to them. Every month, hundreds of kilograms went to feasts in Buchenwald. As for quality, every employee of the commandant's headquarters ordered meat for himself in the prisoner's kitchen. The non-commissioned SS officers on duty sent parcels home with meat stolen from the prisoner's ration. All this led to the fact that over a number of years, primarily from 1939 to 1945, thousands of prisoners died from diseases caused by hunger and malnutrition. Erich Veit, report dated March 8, 1958, Buchenwald at the German Institute of Contemporary History, Berlin. In 1941, the criminal police became interested in the food machinations in Buchenwald and eventually traced them to Karl Koch. As it turned out, it wasn't limited to products. Family business. In November 1941, Koch was interrogated by the police chief, hereditary Prince Waldek-Permont, Josias. He accused the Buchenwald commandant of corruption and enrichment at the expense of Jewish prisoners' property. Upon entering the camp, all valuables were confiscated in favor of the Third Reich, but Koch, as it turned out, didn't hand over everything to the state. At the time of the investigation, he was arrested, but when Reichsfuhrer Himmler learned of this, Koch was released from custody and decreed that henceforth no high-ranking SS leader should be arrested without his order. Nevertheless, Koch was transferred from Buchenwald to the Majdanek concentration camp, where he again became commandant, and his wife remained in her previous place. But the pedantic police chief continued the investigation against Koch. Studying the documents provided by the camp administration, he discovered two familiar names in the lists of the deceased. He saw Walter Kramer and Karl P., prisoners who worked in the camp infirmary and treated even SS officers. Both were shot with the wording, "during an escape attempt on November 6, 1941. This seemed suspicious to the Obergruppenführer. As it turned out, Kramer treated Koch for syphilis. Moreover, he could have known about the commandant's embezzlements. So Kramer and P. became undesirable witnesses whom Koch ordered killed. In 1943, with Himmler's permission, the case was handed over to Judge Konrad Morgan. He checked the correspondence and accounts of Karl and Ilse Koch and was surprised to discover their enormous family fortune. By the beginning of the investigation in July 1943, the Koch spouses had a joint fortune exceeding 100,000 Reichsmarks. Judging by his official income from 1937 to 1943, his savings could have amounted to at most 25,000 Reichsmarks. He could not give a satisfactory explanation of how his fortune increased by more than 75,000 Reichsmarks. From the indictment in the case of Ilse Koch on charges of murder and other crimes, a sudden search was conducted at the villa where Ilse Koch still lived. By that time, rumors about products made from human skin, which the commandant's wife allegedly collected, had reached Morgan. But no collection was found in her house. No lampshades, no photo albums, no gloves. However, money, jewelry, and bank books were found. On August 24, 1943, the Koch spouses were arrested. Karl was again accused of embezzlement and misappropriation of state property. In addition, this time also of murder. And Ilse was in the case as an accomplice. A year and 4 months later, she was released due to lack of evidence. Frau Koch took the children and went to relatives in Ludwigsburg, and her husband was sentenced to death. On April 5, 1945, a week before the liberation of Buchenwald by Allied forces, he was executed right in the camp. On April 13th, American units entered Buchenwald. What they saw shocked them. Mountains of corpses, dying and emaciated people telling of tortures and mass executions. The crematorium ovens, a terrible stench and unsanitary conditions in the barracks. Bodies stacked like firewood. Then we entered the barracks and saw the inhabitants of the camp. A horrifying sight. These people were more dead than alive, walking skeletons. General George Patton ordered everything horrific to be photographed and filmed. 3 days later, the Americans brought about 1,000 residents of Weimar to Buchenwald, who lived just a few kilometers from the camp and allegedly knew nothing about what was happening next to their homes. The survivors recounted tortures and experiments, and the main exhibits shown to visitors and journalists were preserved body parts and organs, dried heads, samples of skin with tattoos, and a desk lamp with a shade made from human skin from the commandant's office. In the press, the first testimonies of survivors appeared, recalling the atrocities of Commandant Koch and his wife, the hated Commandant Shah. Newspapers dubbed her the red-haired witch from Buchenwald, who collected an entire collection of items from human skin, and wrote that she was a beastly sadist and murderer. Her bad fame spread quickly, but she herself knew nothing about it yet. A couple of months later, one of the former Buchenwald inmates met her on the street in Ludwigsburg, after which on June 30, 1945, she was arrested by American military. To each his own. On April 11, 1947, Ilse Koch again stood trial, this time before an American military tribunal in Dachau. She was the only woman among 30 accused Buchenwald employees. Interest in the trial was very high, Additional rows of chairs had to be installed in the courtroom to accommodate the crowd of reporters. All defendants were charged with violating the customs and laws of war. They were accused of war crimes committed against foreign civilians and prisoners of war from September 1939 to April 1945 in Buchenwald, as well as in a common criminal intent, and therefore in approving participation in a system of murders and cruel treatment of prisoners. Ilse Koch, despite not holding an official position in the concentration camp, was accused of overseers cruelly treating prisoners on her orders, as well as personally beating one of them. In addition, Chief Prosecutor William Denson sought to prove that the commandant's wife ordered prisoners killed for skin with tattoos. As evidence, the court was presented with 3 pieces of tattooed skin and a dried head. 10 witnesses, former prisoners, were called. One of them, Herbert Frobois, recounted that in 1940, a group of prisoners worked under the scorching sun without shirts. On the bare torso of a young Frenchman named Jean Calinet, a 4-masted sailing ship was tattooed. Ilse Koch, riding by on her horse, noticed his tattoo, wrote down the prisoner's number, and in the evening, he was called to the camp gates, and no one saw him again. 6 months later, Frobois saw a piece of skin with the sailing ship in the pathological anatomy department. And sometime later on Frau Koch's photo album. This album was not presented in court. 2 more witnesses gave testimony that they saw a lamp with a shade made from human skin and a base from a human leg. But these material evidences were not presented in court either. Ilse Koch herself claimed that she never had such items, and the fact that the Americans found the lampshade in the commandant's office in 1945 only confirms that it belonged not to her, but to the new Buchenwald commandant, Hermann Piester. But Piester was not accused of owning such a lampshade. In addition, she stated that she never entered the camp territory since she performed no functions there and didn't even have the authority to give orders. With a husband like mine, I couldn't deal with camp affairs. He would certainly object. It was important to him that I deal with maternal affairs, and I always tried to create home comfort for him. Ilse Koch, from the court hearing protocol, August 12, 1947. The defendants were given the last word and the right to present mitigating circumstances. For Ilse Koch, it was, unsurprisingly, pregnancy in the late term. From whom she managed to get pregnant behind bars is truly unknown. Some say from a German soldier who dug a tunnel and sneaked into her cell. Others assume from a lawyer or guard. Only the fact that she was expecting a child saved her from the death penalty. The court sentenced her to life imprisonment. But a year later, the military governor of the American occupation zone, General Lucius Clay, reviewed the sentence and reduced Ilse Koch's term of imprisonment to 4 years. Having studied the court hearing protocols, he considered the accusation insufficiently proven, since the witnesses relied on rumors and hearsay in giving testimony, and one of the most important witnesses, Herbert Frobois, was deemed unreliable. In court, he passed himself off as a Franciscan monk. The news of Ilse Koch's release caused a storm of outrage in American newspapers. Activists organized protests and demanded harsher punishment for the woman who had become the embodiment of Nazi crimes. Then, under public pressure, the American authorities instructed the Bavarian government to initiate a new criminal case, and in October 1949, right after Ilse Koch was released from prison, she was arrested again. This time, she was accused of crimes committed against German citizens. 250 witnesses testified in court. In the end, on January 15, 1951, for incitement to murder and cruel physical violence against German prisoners, the court sentenced her to life imprisonment. This time, the sentence was not overturned. Ilse lived until September 1, 1967, when she voluntarily left this life. In 1971, Ilse Koch's son Uwe, born in prison, decided to reveal her name. First, he tried to achieve posthumous rehabilitation of his mother in court. But when he realized that a review of the case in West German courts was practically impossible, he wrote a letter to the New York Times. Uwe claimed that in conversations with him, his mother denied her guilt and said she had been slandered. At the same time, he himself was not convinced of her innocence but believed she became a victim of the system. In his opinion, Ilse deserved punishment but not such a severe one. In none of the 3 trials was her involvement in killing prisoners for tattoos proven. In none of the sentences did the lampshade figure as evidence. But this does not mean that Buchenwald did not produce items from human skin. In 2020, an album was brought to the Auschwitz Museum, on the cover of which traces of tattoos appeared and hairs were visible. The collector acquired it at a flea market in Poland. Experts studied the photo album and concluded that it was made from the skin of a prisoner in Buchenwald. This is a historical item that was made as a gift. Such items were prepared for SS officers so they could give them to someone. This is a form of domination. The personality of Ilse Koch is so overgrown with rumors that it's sometimes impossible to separate them from the truth. Thanks to journalists who described increasingly horrific details of her crimes in each new article, she turned into a real monster. There is an opinion that so much attention was paid to Ilse Koch because she was the only woman among the Buchenwald defendants, and even more so, she felt no guilt for what she had done and did not repent. What do you think? Did the wife of the Buchenwald commandant really have such influence over her husband that she could command on par with him? Was she guilty of the described atrocities? And to whom did the lampshade from human skin really belong? Be sure to write your thoughts in the comments under the video. We'll be very interested to know your opinion. Don't forget to like, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss new interesting analyses.